For a little bit of context, this story took place when I was 19 years old. I am currently 28 and no longer live in the state where this occurrence took place. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station convenience store that was only a few minutes away from my house. I was enrolled in community college, so most of my shifts were evening or overnights. For the most part, the job was normal and boring. We didn't really get many customers during the later hours, and if we did, they usually pumped their gas, paid with a credit card, and were on their way. I decided to pick up some extra hours during our holiday break from school. I figured I could use the extra cash to get Christmas presents for my family. I was scheduled to work 3 overnight shifts in a row, which was a pain because I always found it difficult to fall asleep when I got home in the morning. The first night of my overnight stretch was going by pretty uneventfully. I was biding my time by restocking the shelves and facing the products that had gaps in them. I remember I was bringing out a big box of cosmic brownies to fill our display case when I heard the bell ring and someone enter the store. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., so I dropped what I was doing and headed behind the register to assist the person. I hadn't seen them yet, but yelled out "good evening" to see if I would get a response. I didn't hear anything, so I proceeded to move behind the register to see if the person needed assistance. When I got a glimpse of the person, it looked to be an elderly woman with dark black hair. Her face was covered in wrinkles, but it was hard to really make out anything else as she was bundled up pretty tight due to the cold weather. I saw her moving slowly throughout the aisles, not seemingly looking for anything, but just walking throughout the store. After several minutes of watching her do this, I decided to ask if there was anything I could assist her with. She didn't even bother to look at me or acknowledge that she heard me. She just continued to pace throughout the store. After another 5 minutes or so, she suddenly stopped and stared at the clock that was above the cooler, turned around and scampered out the door and disappeared into the night. To be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I assumed she was homeless and was possibly just trying to get some relief from the cold. We weren't technically supposed to let people loiter in or around the store, but this occurrence seemed pretty harmless to me. The next night, I was sitting behind the counter getting pretty drowsy, wishing the sun would come up so that I could go home and try to get some rest. I was watching a TV show on my iPad around, I think, 4 a.m. when I heard the bell ring. I'm pretty sure I jumped out of my chair as I was not paying attention and dozing in and out of sleep. Startled and trying to regain my composure, I looked at the door to see who had entered, and it was the same woman from the night before. She looked almost exactly the same, except now there seemed to be several scrapes or scratches on her face. I greeted her and asked if there was anything I could help her with. Again, no response, and she began the process of walking up and down the aisles with her head down. I figured I was going to have to wait a minute or two and then let her know that if she wasn't planning on buying anything, then she would have to leave the store. Once a few minutes passed and I informed her, she stopped directly where she was standing, stared at me and said, "The only thing worth bargaining for is your soul." Her voice was high and shrill and not at all what I expected. I responded by saying, "Excuse me?" And she didn't say anything else. She just stared at me with a menacing, almost aggressive look. After about 30 seconds, she exited the store and I watched her walk across the parking lot, hoping she wouldn't come back. The final night of my consecutive overnights came all too quickly, and all I could think about was hoping that this crazy woman wouldn't show up again tonight. I never really had anxiety related to this job, so for the first time I was uneasy about heading into work. I couldn't really focus on anything during my shift other than staring at the door and waiting for customers to enter. I didn't really leave the register even though I probably could have done some stalking throughout the store. The clock seemed to be moving so slow. It was only 3 a.m. and I felt like I had been there for 12 hours. Shortly after 3 a.m., I heard the bell ring, and there she was, the same woman from the 2 previous nights. She looked even more disheveled, and the cuts on her face had increased and were also noticeable on her hands. Her hands almost seemed red, like they were smeared with blood. I looked over to her and yelled out, "Are you okay? Can I get you some help?" Meanwhile, really only concerned with my own safety. She looked up in my direction and mouthed the words, "Help me." and looked like she started to cry. I told her to hold on and went down to my purse to grab my cell phone to contact someone. I found my cell phone and was getting ready to dial 911, but then I heard the bell go and the door open, and when I looked up, she was gone. I didn't even see her scurry across the parking lot. It was that quick. I decided to call my boss, not knowing what else to do. I had clearly woke him up, but he seemed attentive when I explained what transpired during the previous 3 nights. He decided to come in and talk to me and check the property to see if we could locate her. When he arrived, he decided to go to the back and check the video recordings to see if he could get a visual or description on the person in case we decided to contact the authorities that someone had entered our store, clearly in trouble and not in the right mental state. He came back up front about 10 minutes later and had a scowl on his face. "Hand me the phone, I'm calling the cops," he said in a very serious tone. "What?" I asked, startled, slightly worried that she might be back. "Come look at this," he said, leading me back to the surveillance room. He proceeded to rewind the footage that was overlooking the back of the building, near the bathrooms. Upon playing it, I watched as the old woman walked onto screen, facing directly towards the store. Seemingly out of nowhere, her slow demeanor became explosive as she began aggressively thrusting her shoulders into the bricks of the building, falling to her knees and intermittently scratching at her face and the store. She proceeded in this psychotic state for nearly 2 minutes straight before she wandered off screen towards the front of the store and entering towards me. The timing lined up directly with when I remembered seeing her. I was in mild shock, with my hand over my mouth as my boss informed me about experiences he's had with various junkies in the past, explaining that some of them seemed borderline possessed without rhyme or reason for their actions. We ended up reporting the incidents and showing the footage to a few patrolmen, but there wasn't much they could do besides reassuring us that they'd keep an officer patrolling the area for the next couple evenings. The way that woman moved still baffles my mind, based on the difference when I saw her demeanor when she walked in. Looking back, her asking for help really made me wish there was something I could have done for her. But needless to say, I haven't worked night shift for quite some time.
My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car, and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went. We just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, we went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I have my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house. After moving to the dorms for college, I started drinking a lot more than I did in high school. It changed me. During winter break, I came back home to my parents' house to spend the holidays with my family. New Year's was just becoming a holiday that I looked forward to, since it entailed a lot of partying with other people my age. It was New Year's Eve night. My parents were out at a friend's party. I had my 2 best friends over. I'll call them Jim and Steve. That was really our hometown squad back then. We didn't have that many other friends that liked to go out. I had them over to drink and hang out while we figured out our plans for the night. Jim apparently was talking to this girl who invited him to a party across town. She told him that we could come too, so that was our plan. We downed a few shots of rum, then polished off a few cans of beer each, and we each were pretty drunk. Jim called an Uber to the address the girl gave him, and we all split it 3 ways. Jim said he never met this girl, but that they matched on Tinder a week ago, and that she was really pretty and seemed cool based on her texting style. The Uber driver pulled us up in front of some storage-looking building. This was apparently the address. We were confused. Jim read the address over, and we all confirmed on our phones that this building was what came up under the address. Before allowing the Uber driver to leave, Jim confirmed with the girl he was talking to that it was in fact this building and not a house. Almost instantly, she texted back confirming this. So we all got out from the Uber, and then he slowly disappeared down the street. We made jokes about not really wanting to go in and calling the Uber to come back, but ultimately we ended up just going in. We looked for an entryway, and it seemed there was a small door left open with a big guy standing by it. We approached him and asked if this was the party. He nodded his head and pointed in the doorway without saying a word. Pretty sketchy. We walked into this very dark, narrow hallway, following a lone ceiling light hanging at the end of the hall. We were getting closer to the sound of the loud, rumbling music. We got to the end of the hall and found the opening to, I guess, what was supposed to be the party floor. It wasn't nearly as big on the inside as the outside. It was very dark, the only lighting being from a couple cheap-looking strobe light machines. There wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 20 to 30 people sprawled out throughout the area. No one was really dancing either. Everyone was kind of standing in their own little circles. A lot of people were just sitting in chairs by themselves, kind of eyeing us down. The weirdest and most off-putting thing of all, though, we didn't see any females. The music was very loud and hard to talk over, so we moved to a corner further from the speakers and the crowds. I yelled at Jim to call that girl and ask her where she is. She texted back saying she's in the back section, just beyond the double doors. She told us to meet her there. This didn't sound right, and I told Jim that. He said we'd just take a peek back there and leave if she's not there. Jim led the way, following the directions from this girl. We went through these 2 doors held open by door stoppers into this dimly lit narrow hall with a bunch of doors. As we walked, someone quickly appeared from one of the rooms and whispered something in Jim's ear. Jim kept saying what, looking very confused. Then he turned to us and waved his hand saying, "Let's just get out of here." We didn't question it. As we walked back through that little main dance hall, I could tell we were getting looked at again. Some big guy at one of the doors tried stopping us for whatever reason. We just walked through him back down the hall we came through. We noticed he was following us, and finally Jim yelled "run" and started sprinting down the hall. That's when I knew shit was real. We followed, and the guy behind us yelled at the top of his lungs, "Yo, stop them," probably to the guy standing at the entry door. He didn't really make an effort to stop us though when we ran back out the front door. We ran out of the little parking lot into the closest main road, where we called an Uber again. Jim explained that the dude in the hall whispered in his ear to get out of there before midnight, as they were going to trap everyone in there. Jim didn't ask any more questions. He basically just told us to haul ass out. This led us to believe that girl he was talking to didn't exist. It was just some kind of trap to lure unsuspecting victims into whatever was about to go down in that building that night. We made an anonymous police report that something was going down in there that night, and that it should be investigated and shut down. We spent midnight on that New Year's sitting in my living room by ourselves. We never found out what transpired in that warehouse. It was New Year's Eve of 2016. My girlfriend and I were hosting a party in my condo. I invited about 30 people and said they could bring whoever they want as long as they were respectful of my place. As we were setting things up for the party, we kept losing things and then finding them back in the same place a few minutes later, like the TV remote, her bag, or just anything we seemed to need at the moment. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. We figured it was the two of us just accidentally moving stuff without the other knowing. Our guests started pouring in around 9 to 10. That's when we told everyone to arrive. Since my friends would be bringing friends, I positioned some of my surveillance cameras in rooms with valuables, such as the living room and the bedrooms. By the time everyone was over, things were still kind of disappearing. Like at one point, I wanted to show my friends my new pair of shoes my girlfriend got me for Christmas, and I couldn't find them. And even more, my window was left open in my bedroom. Albeit it was a party, and I had to assume my girlfriend or some of the guests had to do with some of this stuff. But it started getting weird. Nevertheless, the condo was crowded, and I didn't have much time to be worrying about this stuff. I told myself I'd check the surveillance footage after the party, or if things persisted, I'd check it during the party. There were a handful of faces I didn't recognize, but I met most of them through whichever friends brought them over. That time of the night that people either can't wait for or dread finally came, and we all started to gather around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square. I looked around the room and noticed some tall guy in a black trench coat facing the wall opposite the TV. He was looking down at the couch doing something. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who that was, but everyone started counting down, so I turned my attention to that and joined in. Everyone yelled Happy New Year and all that, and anyone who came as a couple got their New Year's kiss. And when everyone settled down a bit, I realized that tall guy wasn't in the room anymore. I asked Alan if he knew who that tall guy was, and he said, yeah, that's Tom's friend. So that was that. One of my friend's girlfriends eventually came downstairs and said whoever the guy in the trench coat wasn't leaving the bathroom. I told her it was Tom's friend, and to just use the master bedroom bathroom, so she went back upstairs. Eventually the clock hit 2 a.m., and that's when things were dwindling down and people were starting to make their exits. When everyone was gone, my girlfriend and I said we'd clean up tomorrow. However, we did a quick inspection to make sure nothing was stolen. Her bag was gone completely this time, and so was one of my expensive watches. I rushed to our bedroom to pause the video cameras so I could download the footage and play it back. We started watching from the time guests started to arrive. I had it on fast forward, and we just skimmed all 3 cameras. Eventually, we noticed Tom's friend in the trench coat in the guest bedroom, going through our stuff. I paused the footage in a fit of rage. I cut the footage to a 30-second clip and sent it to my phone, and then texted Tom immediately. I said, "Your friend stole shit from my apartment, bro." He texted back, "Dude, no way, what do you mean?" Then I sent him the footage. A minute later, he texted back, "Who the hell is that? I don't know who that is." I wrote back, "I was told that was your friend." Once again, he said, "Dude, I don't know that guy." My girlfriend and I got nervous now, so I went on a texting spree, texting all of my friends who came, asking if they knew that person. From everyone who was still awake, we got a bunch of no's. So we went to finish the video footage, following the guy in the trench coat. He made his way into our bedroom, opened the door, then started dropping some of our belongings out the window, including my girlfriend's bag. I felt like the room was spinning and my heart was in my throat. Then, the man in the video quickly turned around as if he heard someone coming up the stairs, and he crawled under the bed. We sped through the rest of the video footage, but he never got out from under the bed. under the bed that we were currently sitting on using the laptop. I saw the fear in my girlfriend's eyes and her temptation to scream, but I covered her mouth with my hand and whispered in her ear, "Run on the count of 3. But she couldn't help it. She let out a cry. So I had to yell at her to just run out of the room. I pushed her off the bed and followed close behind. I took a look under the bed before slamming the door shut, and I saw him down there under the bed. We made eye contact. It was an indescribable moment. We called the cops in the kitchen, both grabbing big kitchen knives. Police made it to my condo in like 3 minutes, but by that time the intruder was gone, and our bedroom window was once again open. He escaped through the window and got away with our belongings. I handed over the video footage files to the police department, and they would review it and record an image of the man's face. Of course, he was never found, at least not by our local police department.
I worked in a toy shop for a couple of years, and as you can imagine, Christmas was a pretty intense time for all of us who worked the holiday shifts. It was impossible to get that job without being an intensely enthusiastic, happy, smiley kind of person. Like 80% of the staff were entertainers or had come from some kind of performance background, and we were living the dream, so to speak. We were actually getting paid to play with toys, joke with kids, and above all, Christmas was the best time of the year for that. A toy shop at Christmas time has such a magical feeling about it, especially if all the staff have the Christmas spirit about them. Now, our store was hugely into Christmas, to the point where our smart casual uniforms even had assistants to Santa Claus or Santa's Little Helpers or other various things written in big writing over the back. This, of course, led to some fantastic interactions with kids, asking about if we'd met him and things like that. Being the only staff member who had actually worked with children for years, these questions were normally sent my way to be answered because I always had one ready. So, that's the backstory out of the way. One weekday, at an oddly quiet moment, I was on my own on the shop floor while the other staff members restocked after the afternoon rush. A boy comes in unaccompanied, must have been about 9 or 10, smiles briefly at me, and starts walking around. I gave him a couple of minutes to take a look at things before asking him if he wants to play with the new air-powered rocket launcher we had. "No thanks. I know Santa. I don't need your help," he replies flatly. This was mildly unusual, but hey, he was a pretty sweet kid otherwise. Unfortunately, I don't know much in there that would have been good for a kid his age. I figured it'll probably be his dad or someone paying for it, so I start showing him some of the limited stuff that would be suitable for some of the older kids. I show him a few things, and he sees something he likes, this big massage slipper. It's one big slipper that you put both feet into, and it has various massage settings. Not the kind of thing I'd imagine him to pick out, but a fairly cool gift nonetheless. So he asks how much it is, and I tell him it's like $20 or whatever the price was. He then instantly looks angry and frustrated. "Is that a bit too expensive, bud?" I ask, keeping the tone friendly. I don't want this kid to be upset, and he nods. So I show him some other things, and he starts getting more and more difficult to deal with. He's frowning, breathing all heavy through his nose like he's building up to some kind of temper tantrum. He starts telling me again how he knows Santa, how Santa gives toys away to good kids and doesn't ask for money in return. I just calmly explain that I can't just give stuff away for free, then politely leave him to it to browse the rest of the toys. A couple of more minutes go by. I'm just sitting by the cash register reading a book since the store is so quiet. It's only me and the kid with my manager up in the office. I remember looking up from my book, and the kid is at the register, just staring up at me with this angry look on his face. Once again, I apologize and explain to the kid that, as much as I'd like to, I can't just give stock away, otherwise I'll get fired. "Your boss is mean," the kid says, seething with anger at this point. Now, this probably wasn't the best thing to do, but since the kid was so on the money with this little statement, my boss was indeed a jerk, I just laugh. Like, not hysterically, just like this little involuntary giggle. The kid does not take this well. He thinks I'm laughing at him. "Why are you laughing at me?" he asks, practically shaking with rage. I begin to explain that I'm not actually laughing at him, but I soon realize it's not getting through to him. He just storms out of the store, disappearing among the crowds of middle-aged women that are clogging up the mall. As the afternoon draws on, the store gets a little busier and I get to actually do some work. Like I said, the work was fun, so it was never a problem. Being busy meant the hours go quicker, which means I get to go home quicker. Win-win. So I make a few sales, get to test out some of the fancy new Nerf guns we had in the store, and the weird kid eventually just slips from my mind. Nothing remotely eventful happens for the rest of the day. Right up until closing time when I'm starting my stock take and working on closing down the store. Someone is standing at the register. I look up from my worksheet and it's the kid. I give him a cheery enough greeting, hoping the kid's mood is improved, but it hasn't. Instead, it's gotten worse. "You're mean too," he hisses. "Look, I'm sorry, kid, but where are your parents?" I ask, but the kid refuses to answer. He just glares at me again. "Kid, where are your parents? I don't want to have to call mall security, but you can't be wandering around on your own, okay?" "He knows when you are sleeping," the kid mutters. I roll my eyes, but the way he says it has me really creeped out. "He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good, and you've been really, really bad." Where's your pop, kid?" I ask again, trying to remain calm. "North Pole." "Yeah, very funny, but seriously, you gotta go. The store is closing." "He's gonna climb down your chimney, covered in soot, all while you're asleep," the kid said. I didn't say a word in reply. "He'll know when you're asleep, and he'll be able to creep up right next to your bed." I reach for the store's phone, dialing the mall security short number. I try not to listen to the kid, but I can't help but hear his words over the phone's dial tone. "He's gonna stuff your mouth with coal until you choke and die." I turn, ready to scream at this creepy little brat. It's one thing to be a spoiled kid. It's another to say such threatening things to someone who's only trying to help. But when I turn around, the kid was gone. Not a sign of him, even outside the store in the emptying mall. I've only told this story a handful of times, but it never fails to creep me out. The idea of such a kid having such a skewed idea of Santa as some weird, avenging angel, having a warped view of the holiday season, never, ever fails to make my skin crawl.
4 years ago, after getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came to the company as a trainee. I was very demotivated and I missed my family a lot. At some point I decided to go visit the relatives who lived by the coast, which was 4 to 5 hours away in the car. I didn't have a car and the buses were expensive, but my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another city that was nearby. I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than me. The day for the trip came by. I met them all, and in total there were 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady studying medicine who owned the car, her boyfriend the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy they found on their Facebook ad called Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or plan to do so on the trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober, and that he wouldn't have any even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured me that they wouldn't drink because their parents were very strict and wouldn't let them misbehave. Mark giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot and denying it." The trip went on and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was us listening to popular songs from the 90s. After 2.5 hours, the driver stopped the car at a gas station as he needed the toilet. Mark decided to go with him as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver come back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of beer. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and take one for yourself if you want." 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to a flat land. The sign said we were 1 kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, the car took a right turn, leaving the main road, heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolate, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe they were dropping off the other girl, as they probably already knew where she lived. The dude just parked the car in the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. You guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down with it, but the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink. Okay, I'll make an exception. Only because we just had tough midterms." I elected not to. "How are we going to get to the city?" I asked. "You guys agreed to take me to the bus station?" They said it was really nearby, and in the worst case I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus in a certain hour to get to my cousin's town, which was still 1 hour from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to the point where they were trying to pee, doing a handstand against the wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone signal either, so I had to wait for these guys to see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said it wasn't okay for them to drive anymore because they were all drunk and I offered to drive. However, the driver said that it wasn't up to me, as the car belonged to his girlfriend. His girlfriend refused, saying she didn't even know me, and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I understood, but we had to sort this out somehow. After a bit, the driver finally got off the driver's seat, and I assumed they would let me drive, as I was sitting in the middle of the back seat. So I asked the guy next to me to let me get off the car. The sophomore girl who was on my left did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. The girl started saying, "Friend, please let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside anymore." The other girl said, "Okay, sure, but go slow, yeah?" The previous driver got into the back seat with me and confined me to the back middle seat. I was getting upset and wanted to stop her, but didn't know how to because everyone seemed okay with the idea of drink driving. My panic escalated when this sophomore girl started asking them how to turn the car on and how to operate it. "You don't know how to drive a car?" I said in despair. "No, it's my first time trying. My parents didn't let me learn." "Get down then, please. I have a license. I can get us home safely." Then the car owners told me that I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay as there was almost no one on the road driving at this hour and that we would help her friend drive. The girl really had no idea how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transition car. Had it been a manual, she probably wouldn't have been able to move it. And the car moved, but in the way you would expect for it to move with a driver who'd never stepped on the pedals of an actual car before. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard, drove into the middle of the road and would keep freaking out while the others yelled at her what to do. I was begging them to let me get out of the car, but they wouldn't listen. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help fear that if any car came up to us, we would surely crash against it. Eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was, and as soon as they pointed it out, I asked them to just stop the car already and let me walk there, but they didn't. They forced me to be dropped off in front of it. I don't even know how I could get out of this sort of situation if it were to happen again. I'm a 28-year-old male, but when this happened I was 23. I worked at a mum-and-pop pizza shop in Northern Carolina. It's a small farm town and has a few suburbs near it. I kind of did everything since I knew the family, and they trusted me running things while they were gone. This night though, I was working deliveries and got the weirdest one of my life. Everything seemed fine when I took the order the lady ordered. Anchovies on her pizza. And I always think that people who order that are weird as hell. She made a point to tell me the pizza had to be hot when it got there, or she wouldn't pay for it. So I get the pizza and throw it in the warmer, and drive to her house before any of my other deliveries. I'd like to tell you guys that her house was creepy and run down, but it looked like your average one-story new housing development home. I rang the doorbell and put on my fake customer service smile. You'll know what I'm talking about. As soon as she opened the door, I knew this was going to be bad. The haggard old lady looked like she had been a smoker for over 50 years. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It better be hot, or I'm not paying for it like I told you over the phone." "I understand, Mom. I made sure to stop by your place first, even though it was last on my list." "Bring it in. Set it on the table." She said this, and now I don't normally go inside customers' homes because I've read way too many stories on no sleep and Let's Not Me. But at this point, I want this to be over quickly, so go along with it and say, "No problem. I also brought cheese and ranch for you in case you need it." As soon as I opened the bag, she grabbed the box and her hand was on the bottom of it, rubbing it. "It's not hot enough. You do this every time, and I'm not paying for it. Not a single dime." One thing I have an issue with is my mouth. I don't know when to just stop talking and try to understand where people are coming from. "Look, lady, your house is a 5-minute drive from our shop, and I stopped by your place first. There is no way that your pizza is cold. If you refuse to pay, you're going to be 86ed, and I'll note you on the account." She immediately walked into her kitchen and came back out. She had old pizza from a week prior that she had ordered and threw it at me. "Take your pizza and get out of my house." She kept calling me Satan and the devil. Again, my mouth has no filter and I can't control it. I try, but I fail every time. As I'm closing the bag and laughing about how much I hate my job, I tell her, "Alright, ma'am, you will not be able to order from us again. I hope you have a great day. God bless you and your house." She kept following me outside to the car, screaming that I was the devil, and there was a family outside that was just watching this go down. So I get into my car and start driving. Once I'm back, I tell my manager what happened, and she told me that the lady had already called in screaming about what had happened. Her story was that I cussed her out, got her order wrong, and my manager shut her down and said that I'd never do anything like that. But here's the weird part. She whispered into the phone to my manager and repeated, "Send him back." She called once a day for nearly 3 months, just whispering to whoever answered. She started driving by the restaurant and yelling that the devil works here and that we're going to hell. Now I wasn't scared. I was just annoyed and wanted to retaliate because I can't tell you how many times she tried to follow me back to my apartment when I got off work. One night I pulled over and got out just for her to stop her car in the road with her lights on, yelling, "The devil is here," after I jumped back in my car and sped off. Luckily, after 6 months of dealing with this lady, I found out she was schizophrenic and bipolar and had not been on her meds. Her daughter put her in a care home, but when she was clearing out the house, she saw that her mum had pictures of me all over her bedroom with the word devil written all over it. She found me and explained everything to me, and that was the end of it. My name is Yvonne. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a female, Asian Hispanic. I know, lovely mix. At the time of this, I was in my 30s. I'm about 5'6" and weighed 130 pounds. Athletic, fair-skinned, and was also newly divorced. I had embraced my newfound freedom. I must warn you though, my experience can be triggering, as it contains many acts of violence, both domestic and sexual assault. I would respond flirtatiously yet joking. "Victor, it doesn't hurt to dream." I saw anger in the deep of his big brown eyes, but I promised myself he would get nothing but my pity, and I jokingly said, "I'd rather be dead." Yes, it temporarily numbed my emotions, but due to my selfish behavior, my young children suffered. I was young, but even then, I acted immature. I just wanted to have a good time. I wanted absolutely nothing serious with anyone. My recent divorce was hurting me so deeply, and when I liked someone, I would romance that person until they would be eating from my hand. But then, just like that, I wouldn't contact them again. But when someone showed too much interest in me, I did the very opposite. Yes, I pushed back harder. I had youth and beauty. I was in control, or so I thought. There was this very handsome man who was a friend of a friend's. This night, he happened to be the lucky one who apparently wanted more than to just dance the night away. As you may have guessed, I was most definitely pushing him back, but I had my reasons this time. The last time I had seen this guy, he made comments that made me dislike him even more. "You will be mine," he would jokingly tell me. I would respond flirtatiously yet joking. "Victor, it doesn't hurt to dream." I saw anger in the deep of his big brown eyes, but I promised myself he would get nothing but my pity, and I jokingly said, "I'd rather be dead." Victor replied in a firm voice, "That can be arranged," followed by laughter from him, but also everyone who was there at the party. They thought it was funny too. Then one of Victor's friends said, almost threateningly, "You know, Victor always gets what he wants." With my liquid courage out loud, I said, "I belong to no one, and just to be clear, I'm the one who does the picking and choosing." Feeling slutty, my friends laughed in agreement. Finally, party night had arrived. The plan was for the couples to all go together, males and females paired respectively. But when I got picked up, to my dismay, guess who I'd been paired with? You guessed it, Victor, who also happened to be the person driving us in his brand new red truck. I knew it was a conspiracy, but I wasn't going to back down. I was ready for the challenge. We decided to go to a very fancy club, and Victor was being a total gentleman from what I could tell. The lights were bright, the music was bumping, and the alcohol was flowing. I felt alive. And tonight was all about me. I realized at one point that I needed to go to the ladies' room. It was there that I assessed my current situation and concluded that I would slow down on the drinking. It wasn't even midnight, and I could already feel the effects, which was odd, because not only was my head spinning, but I would feel terribly sleepy. I also didn't want to drink any more, so I could keep my composure and not do something I would regret. But I was feeling sleepy. There was a point where I almost thought I would fall asleep while standing by the sink washing my hands. At the time, I didn't even realize I hadn't finished up my Jack and Coke. This feeling was new, so now it was a matter of survival. I stormed out of the bathroom to find the girls I came with. I wanted to be near them in case I collapsed, but my steps were getting heavier, as were my eyelids. Then I realized the drink. He was tall at 6'2", 250 pounds, with brown hair and beautiful dreamy brown eyes. His teeth were perfectly white and straight. He was walking towards me, and as he got closer, I wanted to yell, "You drugged me, you coward!" Then I felt my legs give out, but I don't remember hitting the floor. I really don't know how long I was out. I opened my eyes to the humming ceiling fan and the cool air hitting my bare body. The first thought was to quickly sit up and find my clothes, but for the time being I couldn't move. I was able to move my eyes, but my entire body was numb. I began questioning myself. Who did I leave the club with? Where am I? Whose living room was I lying in? I wanted my clothes, but how could I find it if I couldn't even move my hands? Suddenly I heard footsteps and a familiar voice. "You awake?" It was Victor. How could he ask so calmly? I wanted to say many obscenities, but my voice wasn't cooperating. It was gone. I realized I was lying butt naked on my adversary's couch, when I realized he was also naked. No. How could this be happening? I was defenseless, pinned to the couch and unable to scream or run. I was Victor's prey, and he was going to have his way with me while holding me hostage. As he grabbed my hair and sat me up on the couch, he got a styrofoam cup and poured a bitter, clear liquid in my mouth, and at the same time he was holding a knife to the side of my throat and screamed at me to drink. The tip of his pocket knife was so sharp, it was best to cooperate. I was being violated in so many ways. I needed to use the bathroom badly, and somehow it seemed as if he read my mind. He dragged me off the couch and threw me to the floor, and had the balls to kick me twice in the ribs. Then, with a closed fist, punched me in the face several times. I could feel the blood flowing from my nose and into my mouth, and immediately felt a lot heavier. He pointed towards the bathroom, and I began to slowly crawl in his direction. I knew I was probably not going to make it out of there alive, but I couldn't understand why he hated me so much. But what about my children? What would happen to them? There was women's underwear and children's toys scattered all over the wooden floor. I grabbed a moist towel from the floor, noticing that neither my clothes nor purse were in sight. Then I heard a phone vibrating. I quickly located it. There it was, a beautiful flip phone. As soon as I opened it, I dialed 911 immediately. I began digging around the bathroom for any information that I could provide to emergency services. They answered, asking what my emergency was. I let the dispatcher know that it wasn't a prank call, that I had been kidnapped, drugged, raped, and brutally beaten by a man. I gave the address I had found on a prescription bottle label in the medicine cabinet. I was in Gilbert, Arizona. I was trying my best to give the best description of Victor, when quickly he tears down the bathroom door. I'm greeted with a fist across my jaw, causing me to stumble and hit my head at the edge of the sink. My heart sank as the flip phone went flying across the floor. I'm losing consciousness, trying to protest from drinking whatever he's forcing down my throat, but obviously I don't have a choice, because what I hear next just confirmed that I was very much dead. A click. I knew what it was. It was a firearm. I felt the cold barrel of the 9mm that was against my temple. I could feel the warm blood dripping down into my chest from my face. And then Victor said the following. "You called the cops. We have to go now. Besides, I need to get rid of you, because my wife and kids will be home soon." I could barely stay awake, so Victor tried to drag me by the hair. But it was taking too long and he lost his patience. He proceeded to drag me by the arm from the 3rd floor. As he exited the door, he grabbed me, threw me over his shoulder, and was trying to get me in the truck. But somehow I was fighting him. I figured he was going to kill me anyway. I might as well fight this deranged, evil man. I was screaming, biting, kicking, and scratching, but I couldn't see because my eyes were closed shut from injuries. But I imagined he needed the gun to shoot me, then go through my body in the desert. Then I heard the police sirens and people coming out of their apartments to hear the commotion, and I began screaming that he's going to kill me in both English and Spanish. As multiple police cruisers came closer, Victor threw my body into the apartment complex garbage bin and peeled off. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I needed sutures in many parts of my body. I had a dislocated shoulder, a broken nose, multiple head injuries, many lacerations, and my body was full of bruises. According to the ER doctor, the toxicology report showed 5 different types of drugs, but my alcohol was below the legal limit. You might be wondering what happened to Victor. I saw him when I was able to testify in court. There were 2 other women who came forward with their testimonies and gave Victor an additional 5 years on top of the 8 he got for the crimes he committed against me. Victor whispered a threat when he got sentenced, something that no victim wants to hear. "Someday, I'll get out, and I'll hunt you down and finish the job. I stopped drinking many years ago and have major trust issues. I cannot emphasize it enough. Always be aware of your surroundings.
They say that 99% of the internet is not accessible to traditional browsers. The world that lives beneath that, which we see when we visit the dark web, contains things which defy normal understanding. It has become the breeding ground to all of man's most perverse and dark fantasies. It is a place where chaos reigns supreme. My mother's not an extremely savvy internet user. In fact, most of the time she has little to no idea of what she's doing on there. If she's on someone else's YouTube account or Google, she often does what she's trying to do without paying attention to whose credentials she is using. Can you blame her though? Her generation didn't grow up with computers. They are severely disadvantaged when it comes to that kind of stuff. I, on the other hand, somewhat pride myself on being knowledgeable about computers and the internet. I don't know how I would have lived life without the opportunities it affords me. One could easily assume then that I would be someone who would take interest in the dark web, and believe me, it's not for the faint of heart. Now the thing is, I am very careful with what I do. I use a great VPN service, and I know what I can and can't click on in order not to expose my IP address to anyone. After years of doing this though, I did however become a bit too careless, and it just happens at the time that I did, I was on my mom's computer. I was hanging with my family during the holidays, and I got into an argument with my little brother, Tommy, about a certain listing I had seen on the dark net, Market Search. He's always been a bit of a sheltered kid, considering that he has a cleft lip, and my parents baby him like a toddler. So I figured that it was my responsibility to show him some of the real world every once in a while. I had told him about this listing for a clown that you can hire for your birthday parties that was for some reason advertised on the dark web, and of course he didn't believe me, so I showed him the listing. We read about how the clown would provide your party with an exceptional experience, one that you would likely never forget. Considering my knowledge of the dark web, I was pretty sure it was not an experience that you would want to remember. After I showed him, I got distracted and went about my business doing other things. Somehow though, I left my browser window open on my mom's computer. This was hands down the worst, most careless slip up of my life, one that I'll likely never live down. After I was done on there, she used that laptop and, thinking that the clown was something that my little brother wanted for his birthday party, she went ahead and paid for him to come visit the house. After I found out what she had done, we tried to cancel it, but I guess it didn't work because that weekend, a clown car pulled up in front of my house for Tommy's birthday. Out of the car stepped an old man in traditional clown makeup with these pale bluish white eyes like those of a blind person, yet he seemed to be able to walk up the driveway totally fine. My mom was very freaked out and had my dad go meet him in the driveway. When my dad approached him, he tried to shake his hand, but instead, the clown just immediately pulled out 3 juggling balls and started tossing them up effortlessly. My dad stared at him for a moment in awe, then began to guide him around the side of the yard into the back, where the rest of the party guests were. I was definitely a bit worried, so I went in the backyard, and the clown was already setting up for the magic show. This guy looked freaky as hell, but everyone in the crowd seemed okay with it. So I suppose I was just being too judgmental and should just let him do his show. Plus, he had a name tag on that said Noisy, and considering he hadn't said a word the whole time, I thought that was pretty funny. For the first trick, he took a quarter out and he pretended to make it disappear in his hand. Then he reached around the back of his head and pulled the quarter out from behind his ear. It was a pretty basic trick, but then he kept going with it. He pulled out quarter after quarter from behind his ear, until there was a pile of change at least a few inches high off the ground beside him. Everyone in the yard seemed impressed when they saw this. It was really an incredible trick. Then he picked up the pile of change off the ground and put it in his shirt. He then held his shirt up with his 2 fingers and launched the coins up in the air, only nothing flew out. The change had totally disappeared, and in its place a bunny rabbit popped out. The crowd really got into this. A few of them even got up and started putting money into his tip jar. Noisy then extended out his hand and pointed to Tommy. Tommy smiled, excited to have been acknowledged, and stepped up. Noisy then pulled out one of those huge bubble-making wands and had Tommy stand in this round tray of soap on the ground. Noisy then lowered the wand over Tommy and lifted it back up quickly, covering him in a gigantic bubble. This was not an ordinary bubble though. It would not pop no matter what. Tommy would hit the side of it and it wouldn't break. Everyone in the audience stared at this speechless. Clearly they were watching something that wasn't possible occurring before their eyes. After a few seconds of being trapped inside the bubble, Tommy started to freak out and thrash against the side of the bubble. He began screaming and crying, panicking. "Hey, let him out," my dad yelled as he started approaching the clown. Noisy then looked over at him and put his fingers to his lips, shushing him. Shh. He then lifted the wand above my brother's head and then quickly brought it down over him. The bubble instantly disappeared, and so did Tommy. Frantic, my dad charged towards Noisy, but just before he could get to him, the clown brought the bubble wand over himself and vanished as well. My dad screamed frantically, looking around for the two of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the crowd began to stand up and try to help my dad look for them. Then we heard a car start up in the driveway. Several of us sprinted to the front yard and saw the clown car pulling out and taking off down the street. My dad, along with several others, got into their cars and peeled out, chasing after him. Then the clown car turned the corner, and by the time we got there, it had vanished. Upon the realization that we had lost him, my dad immediately broke down in tears, screaming and pounding on the steering wheel. I had never seen him get like that before, and I knew that it was all my fault. The following weeks were some of the worst I had ever experienced. Constant contact with the police and interviews, where everyone was relentlessly asking me about why I was on the dark web and what I knew about my little brother's disappearance. I honestly feel like I was lucky that they didn't pin the entire thing on me and just close the case. I didn't stop going on the dark web though. In fact, I started using it more. I knew that if there was any way I was going to find my brother's kidnapper, it wasn't going to be using the old-fashioned police detective model. I had to track Noisy down once he decided to stalk again. So I created various fake identities on numerous dark markets and made postings after postings for birthday party clowns to come perform at my son's party. I was really freaked out by this and had to know more, but after I posted several times for him to meet me, I think he could tell that I was trying to trick him because he would never show up. I'm going to continue to look for him as long as I can, but I think he knows it's me, and for some reason, he doesn't want to be found.
Story is about my auntie, Mum's sister, her partner, and their daughter. They moved into their home in the early 90s. It was built back in the 1930s and hadn't had any major work done to it before they bought it. The first plan of action for my auntie's partner was to knock down some of the walls on the ground floor to open it up and fix all the ceilings in the bedrooms on the first floor. There was a leak in the roof, which meant that all the ceilings were warped and bowed and marked with damp, so he ripped all of it off until it was just exposed rafters and then put new ceiling boards up. This meant that while his work was being done, the loft space was completely empty. Once all the work was done, they could make the house their own. They had a good few months' worth of lovely new home vibes. But one night, my auntie woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone closing the kitchen cupboards quite loudly. Not slamming them shut, more like someone not bothering to take into account that someone else was asleep. Her partner was asleep next to her, so she assumed it was my cousin pottering around down there. My cousin was around 15 at the time, so it didn't surprise my aunt that she wasn't exactly considerate when getting her late-night snacks. She muttered a few words of annoyance and went back to sleep. The banging of the doors continued sporadically for the rest of the night. The next morning, my aunt goes downstairs quite tired from not sleeping too well because of the noise, to find my cousin eating her breakfast at the kitchen table. "I'm surprised you're up so early, considering you were banging about the place all night," my aunt says to my cousin. "What do you mean? I didn't get up last night. I slept right through." My auntie then gets this wave of panic. Who was banging around last night? There was no sign of anything being out of place or disturbed, and all the perimeter doors and windows were locked and undamaged. After a bit of arguing regarding who was walking around with no one owning up to it, my auntie comes to the conclusion that it must have been a particularly vivid dream, and they go about their day. A few weeks pass and it happens again. My auntie is awoken in the middle of the night by the occasional sound of cupboard doors banging shut in the kitchen. This time, she gets up and goes down to investigate, but there's nothing. No one is awake, and nothing looks out of place. At this point, my aunt is getting seriously creeped out. She tries to reason that maybe it's the neighbors, and the sound is being carried through the house because it's always much quieter at night and easier to hear things. But this gets dismissed when my auntie's partner points out that they are semi-detached, and the neighbor's kitchen is on the wrong side of the house for that to be the cause of the noise. The banging is definitely coming from below them in the kitchen, rather than off to one side of the house where the neighbor's kitchen would be. This carries on for a good while. Every week or so, there comes a night where one of them is awoken by sporadic banging. They go to investigate, nothing, and return to bed. Now, a quick digression. My aunt sometimes goes to a medium. She goes to see if she can get messages from relatives who have passed on. Sometimes she gets told spooky accurate stuff, other times it's way off the mark. One time she goes and sees, and this is deep during the period when the banging is going on, but she doesn't mention any of this to the medium. She's always careful, very careful not to say anything or give away any visual clues to whichever medium she's seeing, because she wants to believe and all that, and doesn't want the niggling doubt that she had actually fed the answers to the medium. She's got a great poker face. The medium is talking to her about messages they're receiving, stuff about her career, her partner, which turned out to be true, cheating dirtbag, and then the medium randomly starts talking about her house. How she's been there for a while now, but there's someone in the house who isn't happy. Someone who doesn't like what they've done to the layout. My auntie is confused. She assumes that the medium is talking about her partner or my cousin, but the medium continues. "Check the loft," the medium says. "There's something in the loft." Now this creeps my auntie out even more. She knows that nothing is in the loft. They've never gone up there since moving because everything that was in there they put in the garage when they arrived. So her partner could redo the ceilings, but they never got around to moving all the stuff from the garage to the loft again. So she goes home and tells her partner about how there's supposed to be something in the loft, but not about what she was told about him cheating on her one day, self-fulfilling prophecy and all that. And he gets the ladder and goes up there. There's a period of quiet while he looks around with a torch and then goes, "Holy crap." He comes back down the ladder chute, clutching a piece of paper. "I found this lying on one of the rafters," he says. It's a photograph, a black and white photograph of a woman in her 50s, and she looks pissed, very stern, and it gives all of them the creeps, especially when my auntie's partner insists there's no way it couldn't have been there when he found it. He would have seen it when he was redoing all the ceilings. They cannot work it out, so my auntie rings the old owner. They have a chat, and my auntie describes the woman in the photo. The old owner is able to deduce that it's a picture of his mum. Turns out she died in that house back in the 80s, and he inherited it and continued to live there until he sold it to my aunt's family. Now this gives my auntie a serious case of heebie-jeebies. She puts the phone down and then says out loud that she's sorry if the new layout isn't to the old lady's liking, but they just have to get on with it now. A few nights pass and there's no more noise. But then they're all awoken by the most awful sound of pots and pans being thrown on the floor. They run downstairs, but there's nothing to account for what caused the noise. But my aunt describes it like no noise she's ever heard before. It was just awful. She scans the kitchen counters. Where's the photo of the old woman? Her partner tells her that he threw it away in the morning. My auntie erupts. "Get the photo out of the bin now." He dutifully retrieves it, and she tries to smooth out the creases and apologizes out loud. The photo is put in one of the kitchen drawers and then goes back to bed. After that, my aunt would still get woken up every now and then by the sound of the cupboard doors banging, but she never went to investigate. It was just the old woman voicing her displeasure again. They moved out a few years ago and left a note to the new owner, saying to leave the photo in the kitchen drawer.
A few years ago, we went on a church trip to one of our favorite concerts that runs on New Year's Eve to celebrate the new year. Not only is it concerts, it has all kinds of other events and things to do beside the music. We decided to go super last minute, and a lot of the hotels in the area were booked. We ended up staying in a rinky-dink little roadside motel, about a half hour from all the events, and pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The entire place was sketchy, and made me uncomfortable, but I felt like we could deal with it. So we were separated, boys in a room, girls in a room, and then chaperones. We get into the room and the first thing we notice is a back door. What kind of hotel has a back door? The chaperones staying next door insisted that it's sealed shut, but still let us know if anyone knocks on it to not hesitate to let them know by knocking on the wall or whatever. No sooner than 5 minutes later, one of the guys comes to our room and, jealous of our back door, throws it open, proving that it wasn't sealed shut as we were told. We locked it and went about our business. Late that night at about 11:30 to midnight, we get back to our hotel and our chaperones tell us to lock the doors because there were men sitting outside drinking, very obviously drunk, as they started catcalling us because we went to our room. I didn't think much of it and slammed and locked the door, which the young girls in our room decided would be completely okay to always answer because, well, why would they be knocking on our door if they didn't know us, was their logic. Not okay. And I had to explain to them that you always need to look to see who you're opening for, obviously. Anyway, late that night, I was woken up by an odd sound, almost like tapping. I sat up and glanced around the room before I realized someone was knocking on our door. I very quietly got out of bed, careful to move as silently as possible, and went to the door to check on the peephole. No sooner had I glanced out, a hand slowly covered the peephole to hide two of the men that had been drinking outside earlier, and my heart started racing. I slowly got back to bed, trying to stay quiet and calm as the knocking persisted, only to see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye and realize there was someone standing there, the back door as well, barely visible through the blurry tinted window. One of the girls I was with woke up too. Confused, she looked at me. I used my phone to explain the situation silently as we both waited, terrified, as we watched the shadows through the window and hoped they would leave soon. At some point we both managed to fall asleep again, but when I left the room the next morning, there was a paper on the ground in very shaky, messy handwriting, and it read, "Seeing your pretty eye was enough." I can still remember that note perfectly, even after I shredded it and flushed it down the toilet to avoid anyone finding it. I was young and stupid. Looking back now, I know 100% I should have went straight to a chaperone and told them what happened. It could have been a very dangerous situation, and I'm extremely grateful that I was awoken rather than one of the other younger girls, who would have probably opened the door without checking. I'm also grateful that I triple-checked the doors to make sure they were locked. However, at the same time, it also didn't seem like a big deal to me. Nothing came of it besides extreme paranoia for a while. But all in all, the only long-term bad effect was a permanent bad feeling and fear of roadside motels.